With Peter Jennings.
Good evening. After days of telling the Iraqi army not to interfere with efforts to help the Kurdish refugees return to their homes in northern Iraq, the U.S. military felt compelled today to tell the Kurdish resistance to get out of the way. It is a measure of how fearful Kurds are of leaving themselves exposed to the Iraqi government that their own Kurdish guerrilla organizations have been stopping refugees from going home because they fear no sooner will they get there than the U.S. military will leave them unprotected. ABC's Jim Wooten is tonight in northern Iraq.
There were only a few trickling back to see for themselves if it's safe. And at roadblocks manned by their own guerrilla leaders, they were told it isn't. Not yet.
We cannot leave them until we are sure that the territory of Zaku and the buffer zone is safety from Iraqi policemen.
This is what he's talking about. Iraqi police still on the streets of Zaku. Fewer than yesterday, but enough to make the Kurdish guerrillas and the refugees cautious. We believe only Mr. Bush, he says. If he doesn't promise the people to solve this problem, we can't come back. So General John Varner, the American commander in Iraq, flew the Kurdish guerrilla general to Zaku today to see for himself the large Allied presence there and to ask him to lift the roadblocks. Some who've left the mountain camps have stopped in Kanimasi, a guerrilla stronghold. It's no paradise, there's still no food, but British Royal Marines have an aid station there, and today this boy who was wounded a month ago by an Iraqi grenade was off to get his first real treatment from the busy British medics.
I think this baby's okay, but it is very dry. It needs more fluid.
This baby wasn't okay. Extreme dehydration. The mother watched as the soldiers tried to help her, and nearby, their colleagues, with a Kurdish doctor, tried to sell the refugees on going to Zaku for better treatment.
In Zaku, the Americans and the French and the British are in hospital there, and they will see her there.
But unless the Kurds are convinced that the United States has a long-term commitment to their safety, most will probably stay in the mountains. This handful of Kurds and their families doesn't amount to much when compared to the thousands still up there in the mountains. But at least these few have finally begun their long, hard journey back to their homes, or what's left of them. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Kanimasi, Iraq.
To the south in Baghdad today, the government says it is ready to start selling oil again at a rate of about 600,000 barrels a day. Iraq needs permission from the United Nations, which will take up the question tomorrow. President Bush said today he thinks it's too soon, that the UN should say no. Under the terms of the ceasefire, some of Iraq's oil money, whenever it starts coming in, must go to Kuwait for war reparations. Kuwait is actually one of those rare countries in the world that can afford to rebuild itself, which has attracted an army of businessmen who want a piece of the action. ABC's Jim Bitterman has found some of them in Kuwait City.
I think that's our selling point, Gafis, is we need to convince them that we're going to clean it up as well as purchase it, huh?
Yeah.
Doyle McBride of South Carolina thinks big. He's come to Kuwait intent on winning contracts to buy up and haul away all the scrap metal left over from the war. And that's a lot of scrap metal.
Boy, more than I've ever seen, I'll tell you.
Other companies McBride represents, which manufacture everything from generators to hospital beds, are expecting him to find business for them, too.
We're a long-term player here. We're not somebody who's just flying in, trying to make a lot of money and go home.
McBride is one of hundreds of businessmen who fought visa problems, permissions, and bureaucracy to travel here, hoping to cash in on the tens of billions of dollars that will be spent to rebuild Kuwait. Despite the meager menu, one of Kuwait's few functioning hotel restaurants is the current in-spot for a business lunch, mainly because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stays here. And the Corps is managing emergency reconstruction contracts.
Good to see you. Hey, Mr. Wilson, I've heard a lot about you.
As McBride discovered when he ran into Bull Wilson of Blunt International in the hotel elevator, the big American companies like Blunt, which have won the major cleanup contracts, are willing to subcontract some work to smaller companies.
You mind if we stop by a few minutes and speak with you?
That'll be fine.
Great.
The real money, though, lies in the second phase reconstruction contracts with the government and private enterprise. For those, it's way too early. Government officials continue to be overwhelmed with their day-to-day problems. Private companies are still struggling to get started once again. Communications are poor, decision makers difficult to find. McBride, who spent part of one afternoon just searching for a working photocopy machine, says Kuwait is not for the faint of heart.
Folks in my shoes, a businessman, is going to have to be a little bit patient for a while. I think now we can make some good contacts and make some inroads, but I don't think we can expect too much right away.
Businessmen discover, as they survey the possibilities in Kuwait, that any hopes of hitting it big rest entirely on sticking it out through a reconstruction effort that's painfully slow. Jim Bitterman, ABC News, Kuwait City.
Aftermath of the war in Kuwait City this morning, troops had just finished clearing mines and other unexploded ordnance from a beach when their truck caught fire and blew up. It was apparently an accident, but it did considerable damage to the hotel where the United Nations has its headquarters. In a moment, some of the other news. Schools in Richmond, California, being forced to close because they have run out of money. Warnings about the quality of care at some unregulated walk-in medical clinics. And finally this evening, basketball with the magic touch.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Post Fruit and Fiber Cereal.